Greetings. Shortly after Columbus's discovery of the New World, Spanish conquistadors achieved what seemed impossible. From 1519 to 1521, Hernán Cortés, with a few hundred soldiers, conquered the vast and thriving Aztec Empire. A little later, Francisco Pizarro, with even fewer men, captured the enormous Inca Empire. For a long time, it was believed that the decisive factor in the conquests was the Spaniards' possession of firearms. This explanation is simply untenable. What miracle could have been wrought by the 13 arquebuses and 14 cannons in Cortés's army? What heroic feats could have been performed by 3 arquebusiers and 2 cannons to help Pizarro defeat the vast Inca army? It is evident that the reasons for the conquistadors' success lie elsewhere. In this video, we will delve into the circumstances of Cortés's expedition and uncover the reasons for his resounding success. So, Hernán Fernando Cortés was born in 1485 in the provincial town of Medellín to a noble but not wealthy hidalgo family. At the age of 14, Cortés left his parental home and moved to Salamanca, where he enrolled in one of the best universities in Spain. His parents hoped that, with a law degree, Fernando would be able to secure a good position at the royal court. However, young Cortés managed to endure student life for only 2 years. Like almost any Spanish hidalgo, he was quite skilled in fencing, and he frequently expressed a desire to serve in the army rather than work in a court or at the court. For a time, Cortés served in the Spanish army in Italy, then lived off odd jobs, and finally, at the age of 19, he was able to go to the New World. For some time, he served on the island of Santo Domingo, Haiti, where he took part in suppressing an Indian uprising. He was entrusted with the command of one of the detachments, and Cortés, with virtually no military experience, displayed high martial skills during the fighting, which brought him fame and respect in military circles. It suddenly became clear that the failed lawyer and former student was an excellent combat commander whom soldiers were willing to follow into death. From 1511 to 1514, he participated in the conquest of Cuba, and after the Spaniards succeeded, he was rewarded for his service with an estate and became quite a wealthy man. However, Cortés could not rest. His rebellious soul demanded new adventures. In 1517, the Yucatan Peninsula was discovered, where in the jungles the last cities of the Mayan civilization, which was in full decline, were dying. The following year, Spanish ships reached the coast of Mexico, and Governor Diego Velázquez de Cuellar conceived a grand military campaign to conquer mainland America. Cortés immediately got involved and soon secured the position of the expedition leader. For this, he paid out of his own pocket for 7 of the 10 ships, all the mercenaries, and all the supplies. This was a very large gamble. Although Cortés had become wealthy in the colonies, he invested all his wealth in this extremely risky venture. But Fernando believed in himself and was not going to back down when fate gave him a chance to rise. On the night of November 17, 1518, Cortés's ships left the port of Santiago de Cuba and headed west. However, along the way, they had to stop in the town of Trinidad. There, Cortés decided to reinforce his detachment and buy more provisions. In the winter, the expedition of Juan de Grijalva, returning from a campaign to Yucatan, was in Trinidad. Cortés persuaded Grijalva to join him along with all his men. Finally, the preparations were completed. On February 10, 1519, Cortés's small army boarded the ships and set sail for Yucatan. Over the flagship flew a standard designed by Cortés himself, a black banner with a red cross in a white-blue radiance. Embroidered in gold on the banner was the motto of Roman Emperor Constantine the Great, "In this sign you will conquer." The first contact with the Mesoamerican civilization took place on the island of Cozumel, located near the Yucatan Peninsula and part of the lands of the Maya. The island turned out to be poor and sparsely populated. Cortés discovered a pagan temple on the island, and since all his attempts to persuade the local inhabitants to abandon paganism and accept Christianity were in vain, he ordered the statues of the pagan gods to be thrown down the temple steps. An altar was built in place of the statues, and an image of the Virgin Mary was installed. Father Olmedo conducted the first Mass in the history of Mexico there. From there, Cortés's flotilla, heading along the coast of Yucatan, landed the army at the mouth of the Tabasco River, where the borders of the Aztec Empire began. Cortés's army included 508-foot soldiers, 16 cavalry knights, 13 arquebusiers, 32 crossbowmen, 100 sailors, and 200 slaves from Cortés's estates. The artillery consisted of 10 cannons and 4 falconets, small-caliber cannons. A few words about the Spaniards' weaponry. The overwhelming majority of the foot soldiers were so-called rodaleros, warriors armed with a small round shield, rodela, and a long, one-handed sword. The arquebus was a smoothbore, matchlock, muzzle-loading gun with low rate of fire, but a fairly significant effective range. At a distance of 100 meters, an arquebusier could hit a target measuring 60 by 60 centimeters. Who were the conquistadors about to face? By the time the Spaniards arrived in the early 16th century, the so-called Aztec Empire covered a vast territory of about 200,000 square kilometers, with a population of about 6 million people. Its borders extended from northern Mexico to Guatemala, and from the Pacific coast to the Gulf of Mexico. We call the empire by the name of the ruling people, the Aztecs, also known as the Tenochtitlan, or Mexica, a tribe that came to the territory of Mexico from the north and gradually created the empire described. Before the arrival of the Europeans, the Aztec Empire was not a unified state. Although the Aztecs aimed to annex new territories, they did not seek to fully incorporate them into their empire. Subjugated cities paid tribute to the Aztecs and accepted their governors, but maintained broad autonomy and their own rulers. The core of this empire was the triple alliance of the cities of Tenochtitlan, Tlacopan, and Texcoco, formed in 1428. It was led by the Tlatoani, emperor of Tenochtitlan, elected by 4 high officials with the consent of the rulers of the other 2 cities. He combined supreme administrative, military, and priestly powers, and relied on a government and a council of 80 elders. At the time of the Spanish landing, the emperor was Moctezuma II, who had been ruling since 1502. Here, it is important to note a crucial aspect of Aztec ideology that played a significant role in the organization of the state and shaped the nature of their armed forces. At the core of Aztec mythology were the beliefs that the world was under constant threat of destruction and that the gods were perpetually fighting against chaos to maintain the existence of the universe. The gods needed help, and humans assisted the gods by feeding them with the most valuable and powerful substance in the world, human blood. Thus, annually, between 20,000 and 30,000 lives were sacrificed to the gods. The victims could be either volunteers from the people or captives taken during wars. The blood of the latter was especially valued, as, according to Aztec beliefs, the blood of warriors possessed special magical power. From this, two consequences follow. The first concerns the state of the empire, and the second pertains to the structure of the army. Firstly, the conquered tribes, forced to pay the tax of blood, felt nothing but hatred towards their conquerors and were ready to support any enemies of the Aztecs, seeing them not as invaders, but rather as liberators. Secondly, the main task of the warriors in the Aztec army was not to defeat the enemy, but to capture as many prisoners as possible, and the task of the righteous rulers was to constantly capture prisoners and offer them as sacrifices. The Aztec army consisted of 80,000, 90,000 fighters divided into several categories. The majority of the army was made up of so-called Masehualtin, commoners, warriors who had not distinguished themselves. A warrior who captured one enemy would be promoted to the rank of Tequihua, brave warrior. After capturing two enemies, they were called Quextecatl, warrior arrows. And finally, a warrior who captured three prisoners became a Papalotl, butterfly warrior. After capturing four prisoners, a person's status changed not only in the army, but also in the social structure of society, and they would join one of the two privileged orders, the Eagles or the Jaguars, entering a special class whose status in society resembled that of the nobility in Europe. Those who captured more enemies received corresponding titles within these privileged orders. All of them fought in units that were distinctly different in their attire. This, incidentally, helped the Spaniards quickly identify the experienced warriors' units from the beginners and direct their attacks where they saw fit. The warriors went on campaign wearing cotton armor hardened with salt for stiffness and carrying light shields. The majority of the warriors were armed with weapons called tepostopili. This weapon was a spear ranging from 1.75 to 2.75 meters in length, with obsidian blade inserts. It was used to pierce the enemy's armor and body. The extremely sharp, serrated tip, once embedded in the victim's body, could only be removed at the cost of terrible wounds and suffering. More privileged categories used a club sword called a macuahuitl. It consisted of a wooden base with inserts of the sharpest obsidian. According to contemporaries, in terms of fencing convenience, it was almost on par with the Spanish sword, but significantly sharper. Throwing weapons, bows, slings, and darts with bone tips were very weak and hardly used in serious battles. As seen, the Aztec army was highly capable and, when faced with a small contingent of conquistadors, could have easily destroyed them without much difficulty. So, the Spaniards landed at the mouth of the Tabasco River. Cortés, with part of his crew, moved upriver to visit the Tabascan capital. However, he encountered an unpleasant surprise when the Spaniards' boats clashed with numerous Indian canoes. Upon reaching the shore, the Spaniards began firing their arquebuses. The thunderous noise of the unknown weapon had a stunning effect on the Indians. They scattered, and Cortés quickly took their capital. The next day, the Tabascans launched their entire army of 12,000 men into battle. This time, neither the arquebus fire nor even the artillery barrage stopped the Indians, who began to push the Spanish forces back. The situation was saved by a cavalry raid by the Spaniards into the Indians' rear. Seeing the horsemen, whom they perceived as mythical monsters, something like centaurs, the Indians dropped their weapons and fled in all directions. The defeat drastically changed the position of the chiefs, and soon all the surrounding Indian tribes brought gifts to Cortés and declared their submission to the new authority. Among the gifts were gold and 20 female slaves, whom the Spaniards immediately baptized. Cortés ordered his officers to take the Indian women as concubines. He chose a girl named Malinche for himself, baptized as Marina. It is hard to overestimate the help that Doña Marina provided to her husband and his army. She quickly learned Spanish and remarkably explained the structure of the Aztec Empire, so that soon Cortés was well versed in the intricacies of local politics and could conduct negotiations successfully and knowledgeably. Having formed an alliance with the Tabascans, Cortés ordered a solemn mass to be held, and then instructed his men to board the ships again. He now headed for the harbor of San Juan de Ulua. These lands were part of the Aztec Empire, and Cortés anticipated a meeting with the authorities. To secure his rear, Cortés founded the city of Veracruz there. Cortés was received quite differently here. The Aztec governor of this province brought the Spaniards rich gifts and provided them with 2,000 servants, whom the conquistadors primarily used as porters. Additionally, at Cortés's demand, a delegation was sent to the capital with a demand to submit to the Spaniards. So, what about Emperor Moctezuma? Here, it is worth mentioning an incredible, almost inconceivable coincidence between Indian myths and existing reality. One of the myths told of one of the main Aztec gods, Quetzalcoatl, who arrived on the shores of Mexico on a winged ship, that is, under sails, and landed precisely where Cortés landed. But more importantly, the legends foretold that Quetzalcoatl predicted the arrival of white conquerors from across the sea, who would subjugate all the Indian tribes and overthrow the gods, replacing them with a foreign god. It seems that Moctezuma foolishly believed this legend, which paralyzed his will. Therefore, instead of gathering all his forces to fight the invaders, he took a wait-and-see approach and tried to resolve the conflict through peaceful means. Moctezuma's delegation brought Cortés extremely rich gifts, but the emperor refused to acknowledge Spanish authority and forbade the Spaniards from approaching the capital. By Moctezuma's order, the Spaniards were abandoned by their servants, leaving them alone and without any supplies. Marching to the capital against the will of the ruler of a multi-million-strong country was sheer madness. To make matters worse, the soldiers mutinied, demanding to return to Cuba. It seemed that the expedition had ended in failure. But everything changed overnight. A delegation arrived to Cortés from the ruler of the Totonac Indians, whose capital, Chempoala, was located on the northern coast of the Gulf of Mexico. The Totonacs offered the Spaniards a military alliance against their common enemy, the Aztecs. Cortés eagerly seized this opportunity and quickly led his army along the Gulf of Mexico coast to Chempoala. The conquistadors triumphantly entered the Totonac capital in June 1519. There, he received reinforcements from the Totonacs, an army of 50,000 men. Now, Cortés's enterprise took on a completely different character. Leading such an army, the idea of conquering the Aztecs no longer seemed so adventurous. Additionally, the Totonac leader informed him that their western neighbors, the Tlaxcalans, were also enemies of the Aztecs and could be counted on for support as well. Naturally, Cortés led his forces to the city of Tlaxcala. Although there was not the same unanimity among the Tlaxcalans as there had been with the Totonacs, on September 18th, Tlaxcala opened its gates to the conquistadors. The local chiefs accepted baptism and provided their warriors to Cortés. And what about Moctezuma? He sent delegations with rich gifts to the Spaniards, first to Chempoala and then to Tlaxcala, but his demands became increasingly unclear. Cortés's next target was the city of Cholula, which on October 12th opened its gates to the Spaniards and declared support for the liberation struggle against Aztec tyranny. However, Montezuma's agents bribed the rulers of Cholula, who secretly promised to massacre the Spaniards. At dawn, on October 18th, Cortés struck first. He gathered the entire city elite in his residence and delivered a speech revealing the conspiracy. At the agreed moment, soldiers burst into the courtyard, waiting for the signal. The massacre began. Next, the march to the capital, Tenochtitlan, began. On the morning of November 8, 1519, the combined army of Spaniards, Totonacs, and Tlaxcalans stood before the defenseless Tenochtitlan. Moctezuma realized that his plan had failed and that Cortés would not leave. He sent a new embassy to the Spaniards, expressing respect for the esteemed guests and inviting them into the city. At the head of his army, Cortés ceremoniously entered the capital of the Aztec Empire. Moctezuma was taken hostage. He was held in the palace, where he was afforded all the honors due to the ruler of the empire, but the power had now shifted to the Spaniards and their allies. However, the drama was far from over. Among the Aztecs, there were individuals far more resolute than Moctezuma, who began preparing for an uprising against the Spaniards. One of the first rebellion plans was betrayed to the Spaniards by Moctezuma himself, who had good reason to believe that he would be the first victim of the uprising. Subsequent conspirators were more cautious, quietly amassing troops near Tenochtitlan. Discontent with the Spaniards' demands was growing in the city itself. The situation was becoming increasingly tense. The uprising was sparked by the massacre orchestrated by the garrison chief of Tenochtitlan, Pedro de Alvarado. Initially, he allowed a celebration in honor of the war god Huitzilopochtli, but then ordered the participants of the festival to be slaughtered. The motives behind this act are unclear, but it seems he suspected rebellion. In response, a general uprising broke out, and the Spaniards were trapped in their quarters at the palace of Axayacatl, a fortress granted to them by Moctezuma. For a week, fierce battles raged in the city. Moctezuma attempted to pacify his subjects, but failed. The Aztec ruler perished, either at the hands of the outraged citizens or by the swords of the Spaniards. Finally, the Spaniards decided it was time to retreat. On the night of June 30th to July 1st, 1520, wrapping the hooves of their horses with rags, the conquistadors left the fortress. But a trap awaited them on the causeway leading across the lake. The Aztecs massacred over 800 Spaniards and 5,000 Tlaxcalans. Only about 400 Spaniards survived. Among those who emerged alive from the battle, not a single one was without light or serious wounds. All the cannons and arquebuses were lost, along with many crossbows and most of the horses. Also lost to the depths of the lake was all the Aztec gold, which the Spaniards had divided among themselves before the battle and tried to carry out of the city. This night later became known as the Night of Sorrows. After the defeat, Cortés's exhausted army took refuge in Tlaxcala. The attempt to seize the Aztec country in one bold stroke failed. They had to prepare for heavy, protracted battles. The conquistadors gathered strength and received reinforcements. Ships with weapons, people, and supplies began arriving in Veracruz. Soon the Spaniards became so strengthened that they undertook punitive expeditions against the regions whose inhabitants resisted them. The city of Texcoco played a decisive role in siding with Cortés. If you recall, it was one of the 3 cities that laid the foundation of the Aztec Empire. Texcoco lay opposite Tenochtitlan on the shore of the same lake, and thanks to the betrayal of its inhabitants, Cortés obtained a base near the capital. For lake operations, the Spaniards built 13 brigantines in Tlaxcala, which were transported in disassembled form to Texcoco. Thus, Tenochtitlan was blocked both from the land and from the lake. On May 10, 1521, Cortés began the assault on Tenochtitlan. In the city, the Spaniards had to storm every house and every pyramid. Often, they fell into traps. From the rooftops, from the tops of the pyramids, from all sides, men, women, and children showered them with stones and arrows from bows. Eventually, the assault was repelled. The conquerors had to retreat hastily, leaving behind the bodies of men and horses. The city remained under siege for 3 months. Cortés destroyed the aqueduct and cut off the water supply to the city, and his soldiers began burning and leveling the city's buildings. Eventually, by mutual agreement, on August 13, 1521, 70,000 surviving defenders left the city. The Aztec Empire ceased to exist. On October 15, 1522, Charles V signed a decree appointing Hernán Cortés as governor, captain general, and chief judicial officer for civil and criminal matters in all provinces of New Spain. The main reason for the success of Cortés's enterprise is evident: the fragility of the Aztec Empire. Cortés was essentially not a conqueror, but a leader of the uprising of oppressed tribes under Aztec rule. All other advantages, the presence of firearms, horses, the superstitions of the Indians, played a secondary role. Without the assistance of the rebellious Indians, Cortés would hardly have achieved any significant results. Another significant factor that substantially undermined the resistance of the indigenous people was the smallpox epidemic that swept through the New World. As a result of this devastating disease brought by the conquistadors from Europe, the population of central Mexico, where the Aztec Empire was located, decreased from 15 million in 1518 to 2 million by 1603. I will discuss the smallpox epidemic in a separate video. With that, the story of the conquest of the Aztec Empire comes to an end. Goodbye.